Hello, my dear friends and subscribers and viewers, listeners, and welcome back. Okay, today's video took me a while to make because it is not an easy one. And as you may have guessed, it's all about Harry's speech at the United Nations on Mandela Day. Now, I don't really know how to do an introduction to this video. I'm just going to get right on with it. I think now that everyone else, the Australian media, the American media, the United Kingdom media, YouTube creators all had their say, I think it's only fair that I, as a South African, now have my turn. So let's get on with it. Harry thanks the Mandela Foundation for inviting him to speak. Now, okay, it appears that this is indeed true, but whether the chicken came before the egg or the other way around, I don't know. I have no idea whether the invitation came as a result of contact made from the Harkle side first or exactly how it went down. But believe me, I am in the process of finding out. What I do know is that we are talking money, money again, and I'm in the process of getting the exact details on that too. So we'll discuss that in a separate video when I have those details in full and correct order. Now, Harry refers to having spent time with Mr. Mandela's family over the years, which in a way is true. He met Mr. Mandela's second wife. He's, I think, one of his daughters and some of his grandchildren. I can, however, not find any reference of him ever meeting Madiba himself. But of course, we know his mother did. Harry references Madiba's letters, speeches, and colorful shirts. Now, has Harry ever read any of Madiba's letters? Has he even read the book, The Prison Letters of Nelson Mandela? Or does his wife only know about the letters because of the book, which is obviously visible on the internet? Now, I sincerely doubt either Harry or Meghan actually read that book containing Nelson Mandela's letters, because if he did, he would have known that Madiba's letters were not, N-O-T, not grim and heavy or depressive and full of doom and gloom. But instead, Mandela's letters were filled with optimism, light-heartedness, and inspiration. Judging, however, by the expression on Harry's face and his speech to follow, neither him nor his wife actually read any of those books, or that book in particular. Then he refers to the unimaginable cruelty and injustice Madiba suffered. Now, I am not, hear me clearly, please, I'm begging you, I am not going to argue that Madiba or any other prisoner during those times had not suffered tremendous hardships. Yes, of course they did. Madiba went to prison in the late 60s, and prisons, not only in my country, but everywhere, were not even close to, say, a one-star hotel in those days. And some were worse than others. Yes, indeed, sleeping on a thin mat or mattress on the floor, sweltering hot summer days, freezing cold winter nights. Of course, those things happened. There were no such things as air conditioning or central heating then. But does Harry, or most of you, even know about the other side of Madiba's story? Stories Madiba himself told. Does Harry or any of you know about things like Lieutenant Colonel Harvey Marks, who took Madiba out of prison on Christmas Eve 1986 to take him for a drive around Cape Town? Do you know that Marks even stopped to buy them cokes, leaving Madiba alone and unguarded in the car? Madiba could have gotten out and escaped, but he didn't. And why not? Because that is the mark of a man. He knew Marx would get into trouble if that happened and likely lose his job. And the trust and friendship was worth more to Madiba than short-lived freedom. Do you, Harry, know that in the last 3 prisons where Madiba was held, he lived in a secluded cottage, had a personal cook, and often received visits from his family and friends? He was also treated at a proper hospital in Cape Town, and indeed once when he knocked his head playing tennis. Yes, of course, it wasn't always like that. But if you want to acknowledge the bad, you have to also recognize the good. Mr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela did, and so did others like Lieutenant Colonel Marks. Now, in no way am I diminishing Madiba's prison experience. Those were different times, which even I did not know about at the time. In 1964, when Madiba was sentenced to prison, I was but 1 year old. When I went to high school at the age of 13, more or less, it was the first time I really became aware or formed any awareness of this part of our history. But unlike Harry and the woke liberals, I got to know both sides of the story and not just the story which suited my narrative. Carrying on, Harry then talks about the photo of his mother and Madiba taken in Cape Town in 1997, which was allegedly gifted to him by the late Archbishop Tutu, and then he latches onto him and his wife introducing their 4-month-old to the Archbishop. Now, okay, ladies and gentlemen, and now you really need to buckle your seatbelts because I am, at risk to myself, going to lay it all out for you. And all I ask from you is that if you have made it this far, to pay me a little respect and hear me out before you throw your toys out of the cot and either click out or type abuse in the comment section. Please pay me that 5 cents worth of respect. That is all I ask from you. Now, here are Harry's next words, and I'm quoting verbatim. A man who had endured the worst of humanity, vicious racism, and state-sponsored brutality. Now, bear in mind, Harry is giving this speech in 2022, and Madiba was sentenced to prison in 1964. But, my friends, that is just a gentle reminder to the uninformed, those who still believe that elephants and lions roam our streets here in South Africa, that South Africa has been a democracy with one man, one vote for 28 years now. Forced segregation has not existed in this country for years, even before 1994. Forced segregation basically ended in 1985 when the Mixed Marriages Act was repealed. And that, my dears, is now 37 years ago. Now, to put it in perspective for you, that was 3 years after I finished high school and even before my eldest daughter was born. Now, next, bearing in mind that we are talking about South Africa and the rest of the world, the United Kingdom and the United States included, in the early 60s, when MK or Umkhonto Wesizwe, the military arm of the ANC, was outlawed in South Africa. Now, Umkhonto Wesizwe was founded by Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Joe Slovo in 1961. The same year, South Africa became a republic. It was also confirmed by the ANC after Mr. Mandela's death that he was indeed a member of the Communist Party in the late 50s and early 60s. On the 16th of December 1961, Umkhonto Wesizwe executed 57 bombings, followed by further attacks on New Year's Eve, firmly announcing their existence and intentions of guerrilla warfare, or so it appeared to the rest of the country and its people. Now, did Mr. Mandela himself plan any of that? Well, likely not, as he was on his way and preparing for a trip to the East and Central Africa. But for 1 minute, imagine the atmosphere in this country at that time, and the fact that he was one of the founding members of MK. Now, for the surprise, are you sitting down, ladies and gentlemen? On the 5th of August 1962, South African police, I must admit, captured Nelson Mandela and Cecil Williams near Howick. Now, guess who was responsible for this capture? Yes, the South African police arrested the two of them. But who was behind this arrest? Are you all sitting down? Okay. The CIA. Yes, the American Central Intelligence Agency, which feared Mr. Mandela's association with the communists. Mr. Mandela was charged with inciting workers' strikes and leaving the country without permission. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in jail. In 1963, police raided Liliesleaf Farm, where MK cadres were arrested and paperwork documenting MK activities were found. Mr. Mandela's name appeared In that paperwork, Mr. Mandela and his comrades were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Now, please note the following. Justice Cortes de Wet actually initially threw out the case for insufficient evidence. Oh, wow! What an unfair racist he was! That white man who did not want to jail Mandela. However, Chief Prosecutor Percy Utah reformulated the charges. Now, Percy Utah was South Africa's first Jewish Attorney General eventually, and was born from a family of Lithuanian immigrants. But never mind, that's just extra information. Moving on. 4 of the accused in the trial denied involvement with MK. But the other 5, including Mr. Mandela, admitted to sabotage but denied planning guerrilla warfare against the government. However, of course, there were international calls for the men to be released, but in the real world, they admitted to the charges. Justice de Wet then indeed found them guilty on all of the charges. The prosecution called for the death sentence. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you need to absorb this. Remember me telling you that South Africa was a British colony until 1961. So, our laws were and still are based on British law, or indeed these days I would say partially based. But in 1961, 62, 63, 64, South African law was still very much based on British law. Now, until 1998, the death penalty remained a legally defined punishment for treason in the United Kingdom. Shock! Horror! However, legally, Chief Prosecutor Utah was well within his legal rights to ask for the death sentence. Judge de Wet, however, opted for a less dramatic sentence and sentenced them to life in prison. Now, Madiba spent the first 18 years of his sentence on Robben Island. And yes, conditions were horrific. Madiba was initially classified the lowest grade of prisoner, which also meant that he was only permitted 1 visit and 1 letter every 6 months. And many of these prisoners spend their days breaking rocks into gravel or working on the lime quarry. But Mr. Mandela, or Madiba as we call him, unlike Harry the Ginger Prince, did not waste his life or his time sulking. At night, he studied for his law degree. He also studied Islam. And guess what? He studied Afrikaans so he could understand and converse with the Afrikaner. And those, my dears, Harry included, are Mr. Mandela's own words. Mr. Mandela worked to improve conditions at the prison, and in the early 70s, when Commander Willemse became the commanding officer at the prison, him and Madiba developed a cooperative relationship, and in 1975, Madiba became a Class A prisoner, and everything changed for him and others. Maybe too slowly in the eyes of the world, but it did. So, next time, before Prince Harry gets on any podium ever again, spewing words of hatred and fake, yes, fake anger, please go do your homework. Even in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, not all white men, judges, or even prison wardens were cruel, vicious abusers. Were they cruel, vicious abusers? Yes, certainly they were. Are they still cruel, vicious abusers? Yes, certainly. Here in South Africa, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and in almost every other country in the world. Is there racism here in South Africa? Yes, just like in almost every other country in the world, there are always a handful of idiots. I am sure all of you from the United Kingdom and the United States will agree with me, as you yourselves regularly have incidents to prove me right. But just like all of you, us normal South Africans are carrying on with our lives and have long since adapted to a new rainbow nation, and some have never even known anything else. So no, Harry is wrong, and have certainly not read Madiba's own words. Does Harry know that after Madiba founded the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund in 1995, he donated a third of his annual income to the trust? Yes, Harry, not 5%, but a third. Does Harry even know that Zelda Lagrange, or as we say here in South Africa, Lagrange, a blonde white woman, served Mr. Mandela as private secretary and assistant for 20 years? And guess what? Mr. Mandela chose her. Has he ever heard of her book, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela? Well, if he hasn't, he can certainly go read it. So, F off, you ginger idiot. You have no idea what you are talking about. You do not even know the basic history behind our beloved Madiba. Now, a question I received in the past: why do we South Africans care so much about Nelson Mandela, regardless of either race or religion? Well, not because of what he did prior to 1962, but because of what he stood for. He did not waste one single minute to complain and moan, but instead spent every minute to learn and to strive to make his and all South Africans' lives better. Madiba could have walked out of prison, and with one word or one signal, he could have caused a civil war. But he didn't. That is not what he wanted. He wanted us all to learn to live together and work together in peace. But Harry, a British prince who never met Madiba himself, never read any of the many articles and books, and likely never read Madiba's own words, will go on a stage in front of the world media and spew anger, hatred, and division when he was supposed to honor Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela in one incident, 1 minute, one sentence. My mild dislike of Harry Windsor grew to intense anger and the closest to hatred I have ever felt for a stranger. Yes, Madiba was a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. But unlike Harry the Ginger Nut, he did not run away and abandon his country. And that, my dears, is the biggest difference between Harry Windsor and Nelson Mandela. Nelson fought for his people and his country. Harry? He is slandering his people and his country, and let that sink in. Anyway, my dear friends, as you have noticed, I'm only 3 minutes and 15 seconds into Harry's speech. So I am not done by a long shot. But for the sake of my health, I'm just going to say I have run out of time for now. But I will be back with a part 2, and I hope some of you will join me for that. I will be back as soon as I can, as believe me, I am taking this very seriously, and I am checking and double checking each little detail of every word in these videos in particular. So all that is left for me to say at the moment is please take good care of yourselves until we meet again on the next one. Bye.